The carriage wheels groaned against frozen mud as they climbed the serpentine path toward Castle Dracula. Elena pressed herself against the wooden seat, her bruised ribs protesting with each violent jolt. She had paid the driver everything she possessed to bring her this far into the Carpathian wilderness, to this place where decent folk refused to venture after dark. The driver had taken her coin with trembling fingers, his eyes wide with the superstitious dread that clung to these mountains like morning mist. He would go no further than the outer gates. That was the bargain. Eleanor had nodded, asked no questions, offered no explanations. Explanations required words, and words required strength she no longer possessed. Through the carriage window, the castle emerged from the darkness like a vision from a fever dream. Towers of black stone pierced the night sky, their peaks lost in roiling clouds that seemed to gather perpetually above this cursed place. Gargoyles leered from buttresses, their stone mouths frozen in silent screams. No light shone from any window, no smoke rose from any chimney. It looked like a monument to the dead, which perhaps it was. The carriage lurched to a halt. The driver would not even look at her as she climbed down, would not meet her eyes as she gathered her single worn bag. The moment her feet touched the ground, he whipped his horses into a frenzy, the carriage careening back down the mountain road as though hellhounds snapped at its wheels. Elena stood alone before the massive iron gates. Her breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. Beneath her long sleeves, her arms throbbed with a familiar pain. Beneath her high collar, bruises bloomed like poisonous flowers across her throat. She had wrapped her wrists carefully before leaving, had chosen her plainest dress with the longest sleeves, had pinned her dark hair severely back to hide the places where it had been torn from her scalp. She was 23 years old and looked like a ghost. The gate stood 12 feet high, wrought iron twisted into baroque patterns of thorns and serpents. They should have been locked, should have been impossible for a young woman alone to open. But as Elena approached, they swung inward with a metallic shriek that echoed across the mountainside. An invitation, or a warning. Eleanor stepped through. The courtyard beyond stretched vast and empty, paved with stones so old they had been worn smooth by centuries of feet that no longer walked. Dead ivy clung to the walls, brown and brittle. A fountain stood at the center, its basin cracked and dry, the statue of an angel at its heart, stained black with age and weather. The angel's face had eroded away, leaving only a smooth oval where features should have been. The castle's main door waited at the top of a broad staircase. As Elena climbed, each step sent fresh pain through her battered body. Her former master had been thorough in his final rage, the night she had dared to drop his dinner plate. The punishment had lasted hours. She had left while he slept off his drunk, had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and the few coins she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard. She had fled to the one place she knew he would never follow, to the domain of the creature every village feared more than any human monster. The door opened before she could knock. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the dim interior. For a moment, Elena saw only a shape, impossibly still, impossibly silent. Then her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she beheld him. Count Dracula was not what she had expected. The village stories spoke of a beast, a demon, a thing of rot and corruption. But the man before her possessed a terrible beauty, the kind that made her chest tighten with an emotion she could not name. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his frame lean and powerful beneath a black coat that seemed to absorb the meager light. His face was pale as carved marble, aristocratic and severe, with high cheekbones and a jaw that might have belonged to a Renaissance sculpture. His hair fell to his shoulders, black as a raven's wing, shot through with silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that held her frozen on the threshold. They were red, the deep crimson of fresh blood, of wine held to candlelight, of rubies pulled from the earth. They fixed upon her with an intensity that made her feel transparent, as though he could see through her modest dress to the tapestry of bruises beneath, through her flesh to the frightened bird of her heart beating against her ribs. The Count said nothing. He merely stepped aside, a fluid movement that seemed to defy the normal mechanics of the human body. Elena entered Castle Dracula. The entrance hall stretched before her, a cathedral of shadows. Candles burned in wall sconces, their flames unnaturally still. casting a golden light that did not quite reach the vaulted ceiling far above. Tapestries hung along the walls, their images faded but still discernible. Battle scenes, hunting parties, medieval courts populated by figures whose faces had been worn away by time. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its banister carved from wood so dark it looked black. The door closed behind her, with a sound like a crypt ceiling. "You seek employment." The Count's voice was not a question. It emerged from somewhere deep in his chest, resonant and accented with the music of old Romania, of a time before her grandparents' grandparents had been born. Each word was precisely articulated, as though he had learned to speak from ancient books rather than from living tongues. Elena nodded. Her own voice felt trapped in her throat, held hostage by months of learning that words brought only pain. "You are fleeing something." Again, not a question. Those terrible eyes moved over her face, her posture, the careful way she held her left arm against her side. Or someone. She managed to force out words, her voice barely above a whisper. "I seek only shelter and honest work, my lord. I am a good worker. I do not eat much. I will not complain. I ask only for a room and enough food to sustain me." "You ask to hide." The Count moved closer, and Elena caught a scent like old parchment, like stone cellars, like the earth of deep graves. "This castle is far from the world of men. Few come here by choice. Those who do are either very foolish or very desperate." "I am desperate, my lord." "And the marks upon your body? How did you acquire them?" Eleanor's hands instinctively moved to adjust her collar, to ensure her sleeves covered her wrists completely. "I fell, my lord. I am clumsy." The lie tasted like ash. She had told it so many times before, to the village priest who had looked away, to the baker's wife who had stopped meeting her eyes, to the constable who had laughed and said a man had rights over his own servants. The lie had never saved her. It had only allowed everyone else to pretend they did not see. Count Dracula tilted his head slightly, a gesture that reminded Elena of a wolf catching a scent. "You lie poorly, but you lie to protect yourself, not to deceive me. This I will allow." He turned and began walking toward the staircase, his steps making no sound on the stone floor. "Come." Elena followed, her worn shoes clicking against the floor in contrast to his silence. They climbed the grand staircase, passing oil paintings so darkened with age that the subjects were little more than pale faces floating in seas of shadow. Family portraits, she thought, ancestors watching with eyes that seemed to follow her ascent. The Count led her down a long corridor lined with suits of armor that stood like silent sentinels. The air grew colder as they walked, until Elena could see her breath fogging before her face. They passed room after room, doors closed on whatever lay within. At last, he stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with iron straps. "Your chamber." He pushed the door open. The room beyond was larger than any Elena had ever occupied. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains of deep burgundy velvet drawn back to reveal clean linens. A wardrobe stood against one wall, a washstand against another. A fireplace held the remains of a fire long cold, but wood had been stacked beside it, ready for lighting. A single window looked out over the mountains, the moon visible through glass so old it had rippled like water. "You will keep the castle clean," the Count said. "You will prepare no meals, for I require none. You will speak to no one, for there is no one here but myself and the servants who come only by day. You will ask no questions. You will enter no locked rooms. You will not leave the castle grounds without permission. In exchange, you will have shelter, clothing, and safety. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord." "There is one final rule." The Count turned to face her fully, and in the dim light of the corridor his eyes seemed to glow. "You will tell me the name of the man who marked you as he did." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "My lord, Not tonight. You are exhausted. You are in pain. You have traveled far and suffered much. Tonight you will rest. Tomorrow you will begin your duties. But eventually you will tell me his name." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something ancient and cold. "I am a patient creature. I can wait." He left her then, gliding away down the corridor with that uncanny silence. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new chamber, her hands trembling. She had expected cruelty, had prepared herself for a different kind of monster. But the Count had offered her exactly what she sought: refuge, distance, and the promise that she would not be touched. She entered the room and closed the door. A key hung from the lock on the inside. With shaking fingers, she turned it, hearing the bolt slide home. For the first time in a year, she locked a door against the outside world, rather than having one locked against her. Elena sank onto the bed, her body finally allowing the pain to surface now that she was alone. Her ribs ached, her arms throbbed, her throat felt tight where fingers had squeezed until darkness had crept into the edges of her vision. She wanted to weep, but tears had long ago become a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she lay back against the pillows and stared up at the canopy above her head. The fabric was old but well maintained, embroidered with patterns of roses and thorns. Outside, a wolf howled somewhere in the mountains, the sound both mournful and wild. Eleanor closed her eyes and let exhaustion claim her. As she drifted towards sleep, she thought she heard footsteps pause outside her door. They lingered there for a long moment, then moved on, fading into the silence that filled Castle Dracula like water in a well. In his own chambers, 3 floors above, Count Dracula stood at his window and looked out over his domain. The girl troubled him, which was itself troubling. He had not felt troubled in centuries. He had long ago accepted his nature, had made peace with the monster he had become. He fed when necessary, killed when required, and felt nothing. But the scent of her blood had called to him the moment she crossed his threshold, not with hunger, though his thirst was always present, a low thrum in his veins. No, this was something different. Her blood carried the story of her suffering, each bruise a word, each break a sentence. Violence had been written upon her flesh in a language he knew intimately. He had been a warrior once before the curse. He had defended his lands against invaders, had stood at the walls of his castle and watched armies break against its stones. He had killed to protect what was his. That instinct had not died with his humanity. If anything, it had grown stronger, twisted by centuries into something possessive and absolute. The girl had entered his domain seeking shelter. She was, by the ancient laws he still honored, under his protection now, and someone had dared to harm what was his. Dracula turned from the window, his reflection conspicuously absent from the glass. Tomorrow, he would watch the girl. He would learn her routines, her habits, her small unconscious gestures that revealed the shape of her trauma. He would wait until she trusted him enough to speak the name, and then he would teach the mortal world that there were worse things than monsters in the night. There were monsters in the daylight, creatures that wore human faces and called their cruelty righteousness. Those were the ones who needed to be reminded that some territories should never be violated, that some sanctuaries remained even in this godless world. He smiled, showing teeth too sharp to be human. The dawn was still hours away. He had time. In her locked room, Eleanor slept without dreams for the first time in months, unaware that she had done more than find shelter. She had placed herself under the protection of a creature that still remembered, in the cold chambers of its undead heart, what it meant to guard what was precious. The castle settled into its ancient stillness, and the moon traced its path across the sky, indifferent to the strange compact that had just been forged within walls older than memory. Elena woke to pale sunlight filtering through the ancient window glass. For a disorienting moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night returned, and with them the dull ache that had become her constant companion. She sat up slowly, her body protesting the movement. The room looked different in daylight, less gothic, more merely old. The burgundy curtains were faded, their velvet nap worn smooth in places. The wardrobe bore scratches and dents from centuries of use, but everything was clean, meticulously maintained despite the castle's atmosphere of abandonment. On the washstand, she found a basin filled with fresh water. Beside it lay a neat stack of clothing, a simple black dress of good wool, an apron, a fresh chemise, stockings, all in her size, as though they had been waiting for her. Elena touched the fabric with hesitant fingers. It was finer than anything she had owned in years. She washed as best she could, the cold water shocking against her skin. When she removed her traveling dress, she could not help but see the full extent of the damage in the small mirror above the washstand. Purple and yellow bruises formed continents across her ribs. Finger marks circled her upper arms like dark bracelets. Her left wrist bore a thick bruise where it had been twisted nearly to breaking. Elena dressed quickly, covering the evidence. The new dress fit perfectly, its sleeves long enough to hide her arms, its collar high enough to conceal her throat. She braided her dark hair and pinned it into a severe bun, then tied the apron around her waist. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw what she had become, a shadow of a woman trying to disappear into service. She unlocked her door and stepped into the corridor. Morning light struggled through narrow windows set high in the stone walls, creating pools of illumination separated by lakes of shadow. The castle seemed even larger in daylight, a labyrinth of passages and chambers that stretched beyond her ability to comprehend. Elena made her way downstairs, using the grand staircase she had climbed the night before. In the entrance hall, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight. The tapestries she had glimpsed in candlelight revealed their true state, moth-eaten, faded, some hanging in tatters. The castle was a monument to faded glory, to power that had endured long past its rightful time. She found the kitchen through a servant's door beneath the staircase. It was a vast room with a ceiling supported by stone arches, a massive fireplace at one end, and a long wooden table scarred by centuries of use. Copper pots hung from hooks, their surfaces tarnished but still sound. A larder door stood open, revealing shelves stocked with preserves, dried herbs, wheels of cheese, and sacks of grain. The Count had said he required no meals, but someone had ensured the kitchen was supplied. Eleanor felt a flutter of confusion. If he was truly what the legends claimed, what need had he for such provisions? She found bread in a wooden box still fresh enough to eat. She cut a thin slice and ate it slowly, her stomach cramping from hunger she had been ignoring. As she ate, she noticed something odd, a second door at the far end of the kitchen, smaller than the others, with no handle on this side. A servant's entrance, perhaps for those who came by day. Elena spent the morning exploring the parts of the castle that seemed open to her. She found a great hall with a table long enough to seat 50, its surface thick with dust. She found a library with thousands of books in languages she could not read, their leather bindings cracked with age. She found a music room with a harpsichord so old its keys had yellowed like teeth. Everywhere, the same sense of time suspended, of a place waiting for something that would never return. She began to clean. It was what she knew, what her hands understood. She found cloths and brushes in a scullery off the kitchen, a bucket she filled with water from the well in the courtyard. She started with the entrance hall, wiping down the carved banister, sweeping the stones, carefully dusting the ancient tapestries. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Her former master had demanded perfection, had inspected her work with the eye of a jeweler examining flaws in a diamond. A single streak on a window, a single cobweb in a corner, and his rage would descend like a thunderstorm. Eleanor had learned to be thorough, to anticipate criticism, to make herself as invisible as the cleanliness she created. She worked through the afternoon, losing herself in the rhythm of the tasks. Her body ached, but she had learned to work through pain. Pain was merely a condition of existence, like hunger or cold. It could be endured. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, casting long shadows through the windows, Elena felt a change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder. The silence deepened. She was polishing the wooden panels in the corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. "You have been industrious." The Count's voice made her start, though he had approached in perfect silence. She turned to find him standing a few paces away, dressed as he had been the night before, looking as though daylight had no power over him. But something was different. He seemed more solid somehow, more present, as though he had been partially transparent in the night and only now achieved full materiality. "I am earning my keep, my lord," Elena said, dropping her eyes to the floor. It was safer to look at the ground. "You need not work yourself to exhaustion on your first day. The castle has endured centuries of neglect. It will survive another day of dust." "I prefer to work, my lord. Idle hands trouble me." "You have learned that idleness invites punishment." Again, it was not a question. The Count moved closer, and Elena fought the instinct to shrink back. You have learned to make yourself useful, to justify your existence through labor. Who taught you this lesson? Elena's hands tightened on the polishing cloth. I have always worked, my lord. I know nothing else. That is not an answer, but I told you I am patient. He paused, studying her with those unsettling crimson eyes. You have not eaten properly today. One slice of bread is insufficient. I am accustomed to little, my lord. This is not a house of deprivation. You will eat sufficient food to maintain your strength. Hunger serves no purpose here. He gestured toward the kitchen. Prepare yourself a proper meal. This is not a request. Elena nodded and moved toward the servant's door, grateful for the dismissal. But his voice stopped her. Elena. It was the first time he had spoken her name. She had not realized he knew it. She had not told him. My lord? You keep adjusting your left sleeve. The wound beneath troubles you. Show me. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. It is nothing, my lord, an old injury, nearly healed. Show me. There was steel in his voice now, the command of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Eleanor's hands trembled as she pushed back her sleeve. The bruise on her wrist had darkened overnight, a livid purple-black that spread from the base of her hand halfway to her elbow. In the center, the imprint of fingers was clearly visible, each digit marked in darker shades where pressure had been greatest. The Count stared at her wrist for a long moment. When he looked up, his expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had ignited. Someone held you there, twisted your arm. You thought your wrist would break. I am clumsy, my lord. Do not. The word was quiet, but absolute. Do not insult both of us with lies we know are false. Someone did this to you deliberately, with the intent to cause pain and assert dominance. Someone took pleasure in your suffering. Elena could not speak. Her throat had closed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She waited for the rage, for the accusation that she had somehow deserved it, that she had provoked it through her own inadequacy. That was what always came next. But the Count merely released her wrist, with a gentleness that shocked her more than violence would have. Cover it. Go eat. We will speak again when you are ready. He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the ancient stones. Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding, her wrist throbbing where his fingers had touched it. His skin had been cold, colder than the mountain air, but his touch had been careful, almost reverent. In the kitchen, Eleanor prepared a meal with shaking hands. She found eggs in the larder, cheese, the good bread. She cooked mechanically, her mind replaying the encounter. The Count had looked at her injuries the way one might examine a desecration, a violation of something sacred. There had been no disgust in his expression, no dismissal, only a cold, gathering fury that seemed to fill the space around him like frost spreading across glass. She ate at the long wooden table alone in the vast kitchen. Outside the small windows set high in the walls, twilight was falling. The mountains beyond turned purple, then black. Night was claiming the world. Eleanor finished her meal and washed her dishes, then returned to her cleaning. She worked her way through the ground floor, pushing her exhausted body onward through sheer force of habit. Better to work until she could barely stand than to sit alone with her thoughts, with the memories that waited in stillness. She was polishing brass candlesticks in the library when she heard the great front door open and close. Footsteps echoed in the entrance hall, multiple pairs, the heavy tread of men in boots. Voices carried through the castle, rough and jovial. Delivery for the Count. Where does he want these supplies? Eleanor set down her cloth and moved quietly to the library door. Through it she could see into the entrance hall. 3 men stood there, villagers by their dress, carrying crates and sacks. They looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable in this place. The Count descended the staircase with that fluid grace that seemed to deny gravity. Place them in the kitchen. My servant will organize them. The men obeyed quickly, eager to complete their task and leave. Elena watched as they made several trips, hauling in provisions, more grain, fresh vegetables, salted meat, wine, supplies for a household, not a solitary vampire. The Count must have arranged this for her, must have sent word to the village before she even arrived. As the men prepared to leave, the Count reached into his coat and withdrew a leather purse heavy with coin. For your trouble, and for your discretion. The eldest of the 3 men took the purse with a bow. "Of course, my lord. We saw nothing. We say nothing." But his eyes darted around the hall, taking in every detail with the hungry curiosity of someone who would absolutely be sharing this story in the village tavern within the hour. They left quickly, and the castle returned to its silence. Elena emerged from the library and made her way to the entrance hall. The Count stood at the window, looking out at the darkened mountains. "Thank you, my lord," Elena said quietly, "for the provisions. You did not need to. I protect what is mine." He did not turn from the window. "You are under my roof now. You are my responsibility. I will ensure you have what you require." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they sent a chill down her spine. Not from fear, but from something more complex, more unsettling. His protection felt absolute, implacable, the kind of force that would destroy anything that threatened it. "My lord, I must ask," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you allow me to stay? You could have turned me away." "Most would have." The Count finally turned to look at her. In the dying light, his face seemed carved from marble, beautiful and terrible. "Most would have, but I am not most." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a shadow of old memory crossing his features. "I was betrayed once, long ago, by those I trusted most. I understand what it means to flee, to seek sanctuary in darkness because the light has become unbearable. I offer you what I once sought and was denied, refuge without judgment." Elena felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the wall she had built around her heart. "I do not deserve such kindness. You have been taught to believe you deserve nothing. This is a lie told by those who benefit from your subjugation." The Count moved closer, and Elena held her ground, though instinct screamed at her to retreat. "You will learn differently here. In my house, under my protection, you will not be harmed. This I swear." He held her gaze for a long moment, and Elena found herself unable to look away. His eyes were inhuman, yes, but they held an intensity of purpose that she had never encountered in any living man. He meant every word. "Now rest," he said. "Tomorrow night we will speak more. There are things you must understand about this place, about me, if you are to remain here. But tonight, you need only sleep." Elena nodded and retreated to her chamber. She locked the door behind her, changed into a nightgown she found in the wardrobe, and climbed into the high bed. Through her window, she could see the moon rising over the mountains, full and bright as a silver coin. She thought about the Count's words, about his promise of protection. Part of her wanted desperately to believe him, but she had learned that promises were chains, that kindness was often a prelude to cruelty. She had learned to trust nothing, to expect betrayal, to protect herself because no one else would. But she was so tired of being afraid, of hurting, of waking each day wondering if this would be the day she did not survive. If the Count's protection was real, even for a little while, perhaps she could rest, perhaps she could heal. Elena closed her eyes and let sleep take her, unaware that in his own chambers the Count was composing a letter to be delivered to the village at first light, making inquiries about a young woman who had recently fled her employment. Inquiries that would eventually lead him to a name and address, a man who had dared to brutalize what was now under the protection of Castle Dracula. The Count sealed the letter with wax and his signet ring, then set it aside. He would be patient. He would gather his information carefully. And when the time came, he would deliver a lesson that the mortal world would not soon forget. In the darkness, he smiled. The days fell into a pattern that Elena found both strange and comforting. She woke with the sun, worked through the daylight hours, cleaning and maintaining the vast castle, and prepared simple meals for herself in the enormous kitchen. The Count appeared only after sunset, moving through his domain with that uncanny silence, observing her work with those crimson eyes that missed nothing. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He asked about her comfort, whether she needed anything, if the provisions were sufficient. He never asked about her past, never pressed her for the name he had requested. True to his word, he was patient. Elena found herself relaxing in increments so small she barely noticed them. The constant tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She began to sleep more deeply, no longer startling awake at every sound. The bruises on her body faded from purple to yellow to green, the colors of healing. On the fifth night, as she was dusting the library shelves, the Count entered carrying a leather-bound volume. He settled into one of the high-backed chairs near the fireplace, where Elena had lit a fire against the mountain cold. "You read, I presume?" he asked, opening the book. Elena paused in her work. "A little, my lord. I was taught basic letters as a child." "Come here." She approached cautiously, the duster still clutched in her hand. The Count gestured to the chair opposite his own. "Sit." "My lord, I should not—" "You work without ceasing from dawn until you can barely stand. You eat sparingly despite my instructions to do otherwise. You have spoken perhaps 100 words to me in 5 days, all of them deferential and brief. Tonight, you will sit. You will rest. And if you wish, you will listen while I read." Elena hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair. The leather was soft with age, worn smooth by centuries of use. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the Count's aristocratic features. He began to read. The book was poetry, she realized, old verses in a dialect she barely understood. But the Count's voice transformed the archaic words into music, each line resonating with emotion that seemed impossible from a creature without a beating heart. He read of lost kingdoms, of loves that transcended death, of warriors who chose honor over survival. Elena listened, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the fire. When had anyone last read to her? Her mother, perhaps, before the fever took her when Elena was 7. After that, there had been work, always work, passing from one household to another, learning that her value lay only in the labor of her hands. The Count's voice washed over her, and for the first time in years, Elena felt something other than fear or exhaustion. She felt almost peaceful. When he finished the passage, he closed the book and looked at her. "You have questions. I see them in your eyes, though you are afraid to give them voice." Elena swallowed hard. "My lord, forgive me, but I do not understand. The stories in the village, they say you are a monster. They say you feed on blood, that you cannot bear sunlight, that you have no soul. Yet you show me kindness, you provide for me, you protect me. I do not understand what you are." The Count was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the embossed leather of the book's cover. "The stories are not entirely false. I am what they say, a creature of darkness, sustained by blood, cursed to walk the night for eternity. I have no reflection, no shadow in certain lights. I cannot cross running water or enter a home uninvited. The trappings of faith cause me pain. In these things, the legends speak truth." He looked directly at her, and in the firelight his eyes seemed to burn. "But monsters are not born, Elena, they are made. I was a man once, a warrior who defended these mountains against invaders who would have destroyed everything I loved. I made a choice in desperation, sought power from forces I did not fully understand, and paid a price beyond imagining. I became immortal, yes, but I lost the very things I fought to protect. My family, my people, my humanity, all gone to dust while I endured." "Then why do you remain here?" Elena asked softly. "Why not end your existence if it brings only suffering?" "Because I am a coward." The words were spoken without emotion, a simple statement of fact. "I cannot face what awaits me beyond death. I have committed acts that would damn me 1,000 times over. I have killed. I have fed on innocence. I have allowed my rage and hunger to transform me into the very thing I once hunted. Whatever judgment awaits me, I am not ready to face it." Elena found herself leaning forward. "But you saved me. You offered me sanctuary when I had nowhere else to go. That is not the action of a monster, is it not?" The Count's smile was bitter. "Perhaps I saved you for selfish reasons. Perhaps I keep you here because your presence reminds me of what I lost, of the man I was before the curse. Or perhaps I am simply lonely, and even a monster craves companionship in the endless dark." "I do not believe that," Elena said, surprised by her own boldness. "I have known true monsters, my lord. They do not question their nature. They do not show mercy. They take what they want and destroy what they cannot use. You are not like them." The Count studied her for a long moment. "You speak from experience. The man who marked you, he was such a creature." Elena's hands clenched in her lap, The room suddenly felt colder. "His name," the Count said gently. "I have waited. But I find my patience wearing thin. Tell me who hurt you." "Why does it matter?" Elena's voice cracked. "What good will it do? He is far from here. He cannot reach me now." "He reached you for how long? Months? Years?" 14 months. The words emerged as a whisper. "I entered his service 14 months ago after my previous employer died. He seemed kind at first, generous. He paid well. But after the first month, after I was dependent on the position, he changed. Or perhaps he simply stopped pretending." "What did he do?" Elena closed her eyes. The memories pressed against the inside of her skull like hands against a door. Small things at first, criticisms, comments about my appearance, my competence. Then he began to find fault with everything I did. The food was too hot or too cold. The floors were not clean enough. My dress was too fine, too plain, too provocative, too modest. Nothing I did was right. And when I failed to meet his impossible standards, he would punish me. "How?" The Count's voice had gone very quiet. "With his hands at first, slaps, shoves, then with his fists, then with whatever was near when his rage took him. A fire poker, a riding crop. Once he held my hand over a candle flame until the skin blistered, because I had polished the silver incorrectly." Elena's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the tone of someone reciting facts about a stranger's life. "I tried to leave twice. The first time he found me in the village and dragged me back. The second time, he locked me in the cellar for 3 days without food or water. And no one helped you. The village did nothing." "Why would they?" Elena opened her eyes, meeting the Count's gaze. "I am no one, an orphan, a servant. He is Victor Russo, a merchant with wealth and influence. The constable is his cousin. The priest accepts donations for the church. Who would believe me over him? Who would care? Victor Russo." The Count spoke the name as though tasting it, and something in his expression shifted. The mask of civilized restraint slipped for just a moment, and Elena saw what lay beneath, a rage so ancient and absolute that it made her breath catch. Then the mask returned, smooth and implacable. "And when you finally escaped, where was his estate?" 3 villages south, in the valley near the river crossing. A large house with white walls and a red tile roof. Everyone knows it." Elena hesitated. "My lord, please. I only want to forget. I only want to be safe. Do not draw his attention back to me. He will not touch you again." The Count rose from his chair with fluid grace. "This I swear on what remains of my tattered honor. Victor Russo has violated the sanctuary of my domain by harming one under my protection. He will learn that some transgressions carry prices beyond his ability to pay." Elena stood as well, her heart hammering. "What will you do?" "What I have always done when my territory is violated. I will remind the mortal world that there are still powers in the darkness that they would do well to fear." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Sleep well tonight, Elena. Tomorrow your old life ends completely. Tomorrow you will be truly free." He left her alone in the library, the fire crackling in the hearth, the book of poetry abandoned on the chair. Elena stood trembling, torn between hope and terror. She had given him the name. She had sealed Victor's fate, whatever that fate might be. Part of her screamed that she should feel guilt, that she should protest, that violence in her defense was still violence. But another part, a part she had tried to bury beneath submission and fear, whispered that Victor Russo deserved whatever darkness was coming for him, that he had earned his damnation with every bruise he inflicted, every cry he ignored, every plea he mocked. Elena returned to her chamber and lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep did not come for a long time. When it finally did, she dreamed of white walls stained red, of screams echoing through valleys, of crimson eyes glowing in the darkness like twin flames of judgment. In his chambers, the Count prepared. He dressed in black from head to toe, clothing that would blend with the night. He opened a trunk that had not been disturbed in decades and withdrew items he had once carried into battle. Black gloves of supple leather, a cloak that moved like liquid shadow, a blade of silver so old it predated the castle itself. He had tried to be civilized, to restrain the predator that lurked within his cursed flesh. He had told himself that the man he once was had died with his mortality, that the creature he had become should not involve itself in human affairs. But Elena's broken whisper had awakened something he thought long buried. Not humanity, perhaps, but its shadow. The instinct to protect, to defend, to stand between the innocent and the cruel. He had failed to protect his own people centuries ago. He would not fail Elena now. The Count moved to his window and opened it wide. The night air rushed in, cold and clean. Below, in the courtyard, wolves gathered, drawn by the call he had sent out through the darkness. They looked up at him with eyes that reflected the moonlight, waiting for his command. He had told Elena he was a coward, unwilling to face his judgment, but perhaps that was not entirely true. Perhaps he remained because there was still work to do, still debts to be paid in the currency of retribution. Perhaps his curse had a purpose after all. The Count smiled, and his fangs gleamed in the moonlight. He stepped onto the window ledge, his cloak billowing around him like wings. Then he fell forward into the night, his body dissolving into mist before it struck the ground, reforming as a massive bat that climbed into the sky on leathery wings. The wolves howled their greeting, and together, the lord of the castle and his servants descended from the mountains toward the valley below, toward a white house with red tile roof, toward a man who had no idea that his sins had finally caught up with him, that the darkness he had sown was about to return as harvest. Victor Russo would learn what it meant to harm what belonged to Count Dracula. He would learn that some cruelties echo beyond the mortal world, that some protectors do not forgive, and that the true monsters often wear human faces until the moment they meet something darker than themselves. The night swallowed them all, predator and pack, moving with terrible purpose toward their prey. Victor Russo woke to the sound of wolves howling outside his window. He sat up in his bed, his heart pounding with irritation rather than fear. Damned animals had been getting bolder lately, coming down from the mountains to harass the livestock. He would have to speak to the hunters in the village, perhaps organize a culling. He reached for the lamp beside his bed, but his hand froze in mid-air. There at the foot of his bed, a figure stood in the darkness. Tall, impossibly still, dressed in black that seemed to absorb what little moonlight penetrated the room. "Who the devil are you?" Victor demanded, his voice sharp with the authority of a man accustomed to obedience. "How did you get into my house?" "Through the door." The figure's voice was deep, resonant, cultured. "You left it unlocked, careless for a man with so many enemies." "I have no enemies." Victor swung his legs out of bed, his hand moving toward the pistol he kept in his nightstand. "I am a respected merchant, a pillar of this community. Now get out before I summon the constable. Your cousin will not help you tonight." The figure moved closer, gliding rather than walking, and Victor felt the first prickle of genuine fear trace down his spine. "No one will help you. You are alone with your sins, Victor Russo, and they have come to collect their due." Victor's fingers closed around the pistol. He raised it, aiming at the intruder's chest. "I am warning you. I will shoot." "You may try." Victor pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash illuminating the room for a split second. In that flash, Victor saw his target clearly, a pale face of terrible beauty, eyes that burned like coals, a smile that revealed fangs no human possessed. The bullet struck the figure square in the chest. It did not even flinch. Instead, it reached up with one gloved hand and plucked the flattened slug from where it had lodged in its coat. The metal gleamed in the darkness as the creature examined it with casual interest. "Silver would have been wiser," Count Dracula said. "But I suppose you had no reason to believe in monsters. You thought yourself the only predator in this valley." Victor stumbled backward, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had seen. This was impossible. Vampires were stories to frighten children, not real creatures that could stand in his bedroom and shrug off bullets. "What do you want?" His voice had lost its authority, had become the whimper of a cornered animal. "I want you to understand something." The Count moved closer, and Victor backed against the wall, trapped. 14 months ago, a young woman entered your employment. Elena. You remember her, I trust. The name hit Victor like a blow. The girl, the mousy little thing who had thought she could run from him. He had spent weeks searching for her after she vanished, more from wounded pride than any real need for her services. No one left Victor Russo without permission. No one. What about her? Victor tried to summon defiance. She was my servant. What I did with my own property is my business. The Count's hand shot out faster than Victor could follow, seizing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground as though he weighed nothing. Victor's feet kicked uselessly at the air, his hands clawing at the iron grip that was crushing his windpipe. She was never your property. The Count's voice remained calm, almost conversational, despite the violence of his action. She was a human being deserving of dignity and respect. You treated her as less than an animal. You brutalized her. You terrorized her. You marked her flesh with your cruelty and thought there would be no consequences. Victor tried to speak, to explain, to bargain, but no air could pass the inexorable pressure on his throat. Black spots danced in his vision. You broke her wrist. The Count's grip shifted, his free hand seizing Victor's left wrist. Here, I believe. There was a sharp crack, and Victor's scream emerged as a strangled gurgle as bones splintered beneath the vampire's grip. Agony exploded up his arm, white-hot and absolute. You burned her hand with a candle flame. The Count released Victor's throat, letting him drop to the floor, gasping and sobbing. Before he could crawl away, that terrible hand caught his right hand, holding it steady. Which hand was it? This one? Please. Victor found his voice, found the words he had heard so many times from Elena's lips, words he had ignored with casual cruelty. Please. I am sorry, I will never touch her again, I swear, please. I know you will not touch her again. I am here to ensure it. From somewhere in his cloak, the Count produced a candle and a match. He lit the candle with methodical care, and in its flickering light, Victor saw his face fully for the first time. Not a face of mindless hunger or bestial rage, but something far more terrifying. Cold. Implacable justice embodied in a creature beyond mortal law. The Count held Victor's hand over the candle flame. Victor screamed, his voice echoing through the house, but no servants came running. He was alone with the monster, alone with the consequences of his actions. The Count held his hand there for exactly as long as Victor had held Elena's. He had calculated the duration precisely, drawing on Elena's testimony and his own knowledge of human endurance. When he finally released Victor's hand, the flesh was blistered and blackened, the stench of burned meat filling the room. Victor collapsed, cradling his ruined hand, his broken wrist, tears and mucus streaming down his face. "Why?" he sobbed. "Why are you doing this?" "Because she came to me for sanctuary." The Count crouched beside him, and in the candlelight his shadow stretched across the wall like the wings of some monstrous bird. "She entered my domain seeking refuge from your cruelty. By the old laws, the laws that predate your churches and your constables, she is under my protection now, and I take that responsibility very seriously. She is nothing." Victor spat blood, his voice hoarse from screaming. "A servant, an orphan, nobody of consequence. You cannot do this to me over her. I have connections, influence. My cousin will—" "Your cousin is currently sleeping very soundly, as is everyone else in this house and in the village beyond. I have seen to it. There will be no interruptions tonight, no rescue, no mercy. There is only you and me and the debt you owe." The Count stood, looking down at Victor with eyes that held centuries of accumulated darkness. "I could kill you. It would be easy. A moment's work to drain you dry, to leave your corpse as a warning to others who might think to harm the vulnerable. But death would be too simple, too quick. You would escape into whatever afterlife awaits you, and your suffering would end." He moved to the window and opened it wide. The wolves' howling grew louder, closer. "Instead, you will live. You will live with your broken wrist that will never quite heal properly, with your burned hand that will ache with every change of weather. You will live with the knowledge that your reputation in this valley is about to become very different." The Count withdrew a piece of parchment from his coat and placed it on Victor's desk. "This is a confession. It details every cruelty you inflicted upon Elena, signed and sealed with your own hand. I am an excellent forger. By tomorrow, Copies will have reached the priest, the mayor, and several prominent families in the region. Your cousin may try to suppress it, but rumors, once started, are very difficult to stop. You are ruining me." Victor's voice was barely a whisper. "I am giving you what you deserve. Justice, delivered in the darkness because the daylight world failed utterly to provide it." The Count moved back toward the door. "But I am also giving you a choice. You can remain here, endure the scandal, and perhaps eventually rebuild some fragment of your life if you demonstrate genuine remorse and change. Or you can flee, start over somewhere new, carry your scars as reminders of what happens when cruelty meets consequence." He paused at the threshold. "Know this, Victor Russo, I will be watching. If I hear that you have raised your hand against another woman, if any whisper reaches me that you have returned to your old ways, I will come for you again. And next time I will not be so merciful. Next time I will show you what true monsters are capable of when their patience is exhausted." The Count stepped through the door and was simply gone, vanished into shadow as though he had never been there at all. The wolves' howling faded into the distance. Slowly, the normal sounds of night returned. Wind in the trees, the creak of the old house settling, Victor's own ragged breathing. He lay on his bedroom floor, cradling his injuries, and wept. Not from pain, though the pain was extraordinary. Not from fear, though fear had shown him depths he never knew existed. He wept because for the first time in his adult life, Victor Russo understood what it meant to be helpless, to be at the mercy of a power that felt no mercy, to beg for compassion and receive only the exact measure of suffering he himself had inflicted. He wept because he had been given a glimpse of what Elena had endured every day for 14 months, and the knowledge was unbearable. By the time dawn broke over the valley, Victor had dragged himself to his bed and collapsed into a fitful sleep haunted by crimson eyes and fangs gleaming in candlelight. When his servants found him hours later, delirious with pain and fever, he would claim he had been attacked by thieves in the night. But the confession that appeared throughout the village told a different story, and the whispers began almost immediately. The merchant Russo, so respected, so generous with his coin. They said he beat his servants. They said he tortured a young woman for over a year. They said he was a monster hiding behind a civilized mask. The church began an inquiry. Several business partners withdrew their support. His cousin, the constable, could not meet his eyes. Within a month, Victor sold his house at a loss and left the valley, heading north toward the coast where no one knew his name. He would try to start again, to be different, haunted always by the memory of a creature in the darkness who had held him accountable when no human authority would. Meanwhile, as the first light of dawn touched the peaks of the Carpathian Mountains, Count Dracula returned to his castle. He entered through the great front door and climbed the stairs to his chambers. The night's work had been satisfying in a way he had not experienced in decades. Not the satisfaction of feeding, of sating his hunger, but something deeper. The satisfaction of purpose, of using his curse for something beyond mere survival. He removed his cloak and gloves, washed the scent of Victor's fear from his hands, and changed into the dark formal wear he preferred. Then, though dawn was breaking, and he should seek his rest in the deeper vaults of the castle, he found himself climbing the stairs toward Elena's chamber. He stood outside her door for a long moment, listening to the soft sound of her breathing within. She was still asleep, still safe, still protected. She did not know yet what had transpired in the valley below. She would learn eventually, but for now she could rest in innocence. The Count pressed his palm against her door, a gesture almost tender. "It is done," he whispered to the wood between them. "You are avenged. You are safe. And no one will ever harm you again while I endure." He turned away and descended to his own dark chambers, to the coffin lined with the earth of his homeland, where he would sleep through the daylight hours. As he settled into that death-like rest, his last conscious thought was of Elena's face, when she had spoken of her tormentor, of the fear and shame that had filled her eyes. Those emotions would fade now. He would make certain of it. Whatever monster he had become, whatever sins stained his immortal soul, he could still do this one good thing. He could give one broken woman the chance to heal, and perhaps in doing so, He might find something he thought lost forever, a fragment of redemption in the endless darkness of his cursed existence. Elena woke to find the castle changed. Not physically, for the ancient stones remained as they had been for centuries. But something in the atmosphere had shifted, as though a storm had passed in the night and left clear skies in its wake. She rose and dressed, her movements easier than they had been in days. The last of her visible bruises had faded to pale yellow shadows that would soon disappear entirely. Her wrist no longer throbbed with every movement. For the first time in 14 months, her body felt like her own again, no longer a map of someone else's cruelty. She descended to the kitchen and found a note on the table, written in an elegant, old-fashioned hand. "When you are ready, come to the library. We must speak." Elena prepared a simple breakfast and ate slowly, gathering her courage. She knew somehow that something had happened in the night. The air itself felt different, charged with a significance she could not quite name. She found the Count in the library, seated in the same chair where he had read poetry to her days before. But now he looked weary in a way she had not seen previously, as though some great effort had drained even his supernatural vitality. His eyes, usually so intense, held a distant quality, as if he were looking at something far beyond the walls of this room. "My lord." Elena curtsied, an old habit she could not quite break. "Sit, Elena, please." He gestured to the chair opposite his own. "We have much to discuss." She sat, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken things. "Victor Rousseau will not trouble you again," the Count said finally. "He has learned the cost of his cruelty, and I have ensured that his reputation in the valley is thoroughly destroyed. He will leave this region likely within days, and he will carry the scars of his sins for the remainder of his life." Elena's breath caught. "What did you do?" "What was necessary. What was just. No more, no less." The Count's expression remained impassive. "I did not kill him, if that concerns you. I am many things, but I do not waste death on those who deserve to live with their consequences. He will survive, but he will never forget what it means to be powerless, to be at the mercy of something stronger and crueler than himself." "You hurt him." "It was not a question. I returned to him exactly what he gave to you. His wrist is broken, his hand is burned, and he now understands, in the most visceral way possible, what he inflicted upon an innocent woman who had no power to defend herself." The Count leaned forward slightly. "Does this disturb you? Do you feel pity for him?" Elena searched her heart for the guilt she thought she should feel. She found none. "No, I feel nothing for him except perhaps satisfaction that he finally faced justice of some kind. But I am troubled, my lord, because I have made you into a weapon for my vengeance. I have stained your hands with my desire for retribution." To her surprise, the Count laughed, a sound without humor but not without warmth. "Child, my hands have been stained for centuries with acts far darker than what I did to Victor Rousseau. I am a creature of blood and death. If anything, using my curse to protect rather than to prey is perhaps the most virtuous thing I have done since I became what I am." "Then you do not regret it?" "I regret nothing, except that I did not act sooner, that you suffered for 14 months before finding your way to my door." He studied her with those crimson eyes. "But I must ask you something, and I need you to answer truthfully. Now that you are avenged, now that Victor can no longer harm you, do you wish to leave? You came here seeking refuge, but you may find that staying with a monster, even a monster who protects you, is too high a price to pay for safety." Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. She thought about the village she had fled, about the other households she might serve, about a life beyond these ancient walls. Then she thought about the past days in this castle, about the strange peace she had found in its shadows, about the way the Count read poetry by firelight and ensured she ate properly and kept his distance, unless she invited otherwise. "Where would I go?" she asked softly. "Back to the world that ignored my suffering. Back to serve in houses where my powerlessness would make me vulnerable again. I have learned something in my time here, my lord. The true monsters are not always the ones with fangs and crimson eyes. Sometimes they are the ordinary men who abuse their power simply because they can, secure in the knowledge that no one will stop them. She met his gaze directly. You are the first being, mortal or otherwise, who has treated me with genuine respect. You saw my suffering and you acted. You asked nothing in return. You gave me safety without demanding I earn it through submission. If that makes you a monster, then perhaps I prefer monsters to men. Something shifted in the Count's expression, a crack in the ancient armor he wore. You do not know what you are saying. I am damned, Elena. Cursed to exist beyond my natural span, sustained by blood, denied the peace of death or the hope of redemption. To align yourself with me is to step into darkness. I have been in darkness, my lord. Victor's house was darkness. The indifference of those who could have helped but chose not to was darkness. This castle, for all its shadows and secrets, is the first place I have felt light in over a year. Elena leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. If you will allow me to stay, I wish to remain. Not as a cowering servant hiding from her past, but as someone choosing freely to dwell in a place where she is valued. The Count was silent for a long time, his eyes searching her face as though looking for doubt or fear. He found neither. Finally, he nodded slowly. Then you shall stay for as long as you wish, but you must understand what that means. The villagers will talk. They will say you have been enchanted, corrupted, made into something unholy by your proximity to me. You will become an outcast, unable to return to normal society, even if you later change your mind. Normal society abandoned me long before I climbed this mountain, Elena replied. I am already an outcast. At least here I am an outcast who is safe. Very well. The Count rose from his chair. Then we must establish new terms. You are no longer merely a servant seeking refuge. You are a member of this household, such as it is. You will continue to maintain the castle if you wish, but as its keeper, not as a menial. You will eat properly, rest when you are weary, and occupy your time as you see fit. And most importantly, you will learn to defend yourself. Elena blinked in surprise. My lord, I protected you from Victor because he violated the sanctuary of my domain. But I will not always be near when danger threatens. You must learn to protect yourself, to carry your safety in your own hands rather than depending entirely on the protection of others. He moved to a cabinet against the wall and opened it, revealing an array of objects within. The castle contains many things, books, weapons, tools of various kinds. You will learn to use them. You will become formidable. He withdrew a slender dagger in a leather sheath, the blade silver, the hilt wrapped in worn leather. This was carried by a warrior maiden in the armies that defended these mountains 3 centuries ago. She fell in battle, but her courage was legendary. The blade has been blessed, though by which faith I cannot recall. It will harm both mortal and immortal threats. He held it out to Eleanor. She took it with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it, the balance. It felt alive somehow, eager. I do not know how to use this, she said. You will learn. I will teach you. The Count's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You have survived horrors that would have broken stronger souls. You have endured and escaped. But survival is not enough. You must learn to thrive, to reclaim the power that was taken from you. This is not optional, Elena. If you stay in my house, you will become someone who cannot be victimized again. Eleanor looked down at the dagger in her hands, then back at the Count. In his eyes she saw not the predatory hunger she had feared, but something else entirely, respect, perhaps even a kind of fierce pride. When do we begin? She asked. Over the following weeks, Elena's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The Count proved to be a demanding but patient instructor. In the evenings after the sun had set, and he emerged from whatever deep chamber he occupied during daylight hours, he would meet her in the great hall and teach her to fight. At first it was simply movement, how to stand, how to balance, how to move efficiently without wasted motion. Elena's body, weakened by months of abuse and poor nutrition, struggled initially. But as she ate properly and rested fully, strength returned. Her muscles, dormant for so long, began to remember what it meant to move with purpose rather than simply to serve. Then came the blade work. The Count taught her to use the dagger, to strike precisely and without hesitation. Mercy is a luxury for those with power, he told her. When you are threatened, you must act decisively. Hesitation will kill you. But beyond physical training, he taught her other things. He showed her the castle's hidden passages, the ways to move unseen through its corridors. He taught her which herbs in the garden were medicinal and which were poisonous. He opened the library to her completely and encouraged her to read, to expand her mind, to become educated in ways that had been denied her as a servant. Elena discovered she had a hunger for knowledge that matched her hunger for safety. She read by candlelight late into the night, absorbing histories and philosophies, learning languages she had never known existed. The Count would sometimes sit with her answering questions, clarifying points, revealing a depth of knowledge accumulated over centuries of existence. They developed a routine that was almost domestic. She would work through the day, maintaining the castle and reading in the library. He would appear at sunset, and they would share the evening hours, training, reading, talking. He told her stories of the old world, of battles fought and kingdoms risen and fallen. She told him of her childhood before the hardship, of small joys she had almost forgotten. Slowly, imperceptibly, something grew between them. Not love, not yet, but something more complex. Mutual respect, companionship, a bond forged between two outcasts who had found unexpected sanctuary in each other's company. One evening, nearly 2 months after Eleanor's arrival, she was practicing her blade work in the great hall when the Count stopped her mid-strike. "You move differently now," he observed. "With confidence, authority, you are no longer the frightened girl who climbed my steps." Elena lowered the dagger, breathing hard from exertion. "I feel different, stronger, less afraid." "Good. Fear is useful, but it should not rule you." He paused, then added quietly, "I have received word from the valley. Victor Russo left 3 weeks ago, heading north. His house stands empty. The village still whispers about the scandal, about the confession that mysteriously appeared. You are free of him completely now." Eleanor felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying without realizing it. "Thank you, my lord, for everything you have done. I did only what was right, but there is something else you should know." The Count's expression grew thoughtful. "The villagers talk about you as well. They say the Count's witch lives in the castle, that you have been corrupted by dark magic, that you are no longer human. They will not welcome you back, Elena, should you ever wish to leave." "I have no wish to leave." The words came easily, without hesitation. "This is my home now, if you will have me." The Count was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Eleanor saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Vulnerability, as though her answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. "Then stay," he said finally. "For as long as you wish. For as long as you can bear the company of a creature cursed to walk the night." "I think," Elena said softly, "that you are the least cursed being I have ever known. You have given me everything Victor took, my dignity, my strength, my freedom. You have asked nothing in return. If that is the behavior of a cursed creature, then perhaps curses are not what the world believes them to be." The Count reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. His cold hand gently touched her cheek, a gesture both tender and hesitant, as though he had forgotten how to offer comfort and was relearning the skill. "You see more than what I am," he murmured. "You see what I was, what fragments of humanity still linger in this cursed shell. That is a rare gift, Eleanor, perhaps even a dangerous one." "Why dangerous?" "Because it makes me hope, and hope is a poisonous thing for a creature like me. Hope suggests the possibility of redemption, of change, of something beyond the endless dark, and I have learned not to hope, for hope has disappointed me too many times." Eleanor covered his hand with her own, feeling the chill of his skin, the terrible stillness where a pulse should beat. "Then perhaps we can learn to hope together, two outcasts finding light in the shadows." The Count smiled, a true smile this time, not the bitter expression she had seen before. "Perhaps we can." In the months that followed, the bond between them deepened. Eleanor grew stronger, more skilled, more confident. She managed the castle with the authority of a chatelaine, no longer a servant but the keeper of an ancient domain. And the Count, for the first time in centuries, felt something he had thought lost forever. Purpose beyond mere survival, connection beyond mere feeding, the possibility that his cursed existence might still hold meaning. They did not speak of love. The word was too complicated, too laden with expectations and impossibilities. She was mortal, he was not. She would age, he would remain unchanged. But in the nights they spent together, in the training sessions and quiet conversations, in the simple act of existing in each other's presence, something grew that was perhaps more profound than love: understanding, acceptance, and the fierce loyalty of two souls who had found sanctuary in the last place either expected to find it. The village continued to whisper. The castle on the mountain remained a place of shadow and legend, but within its ancient walls, a young woman who had been broken learned to be whole again, and a vampire who had been a monster for centuries remembered what it meant to protect rather than prey, to give rather than take, to feel something other than hunger in the hollow place where his heart no longer beat. Victor Rousseau's name became a warning whispered among the villages: harm the helpless, and something in the darkness will come for you. Abuse your power, and you will learn that there are older powers still, powers that remember justice when the world of daylight has forgotten it. And in Castle Dracula, as winter settled over the Carpathian mountains and snow began to fall on ancient stones, Elena stood at her window watching the moonlight on white peaks, a silver dagger at her belt, no longer a victim but a woman who had reclaimed herself. Behind her in the doorway, the Count watched her with eyes that had seen centuries of darkness, but had learned through her courage and resilience to see something else, the possibility that even the damned could serve something greater than their curse, that even monsters could be guardians, and that sometimes the greatest act of humanity came not from those who had never lost it, but from those who had lost it utterly and fought to reclaim whatever fragments remained. "Are you content?" he asked softly. Elena turned to face him, and her smile was genuine, unclouded by fear or doubt. "I am home. Yes, my lord, I am content." And in the ancient castle on the mountain, as snow fell and wolves sang to the moon, and the night stretched eternal and cold, two unlikely souls found what they had both been seeking. Not salvation, perhaps, but something close enough to matter. A place where broken things could heal, where darkness could shelter rather than destroy, and where the last fragments of humanity could flicker like candle flames in the vast and endless night. The story might have ended there, with Elena safe and Victor vanquished, with the monster and the maiden finding peace in their isolated sanctuary. But stories, like lives, are never truly finished. They simply continue, unfolding in the darkness, shaping themselves into legends that will be whispered for generations to come. The legend of the Count and his protected one. The legend of the woman who sought refuge with a monster and found salvation. The legend of the vampire who remembered, in the twilight of his cursed existence, what it meant to be human. And high in the Carpathian mountains, in a castle older than memory, that legend lived on, as real as stone and shadow, as enduring as the bond between two souls who had found each other in the darkness and refused to let go.